Josh, did you hear? They're putting the Libertarian back on the podcast.
No.
Oh? You didn't see the calendar?
No.
You should talk to Kayla about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, who's on the show Tuesday?
You and Joe.
Yeah. Like he's back.
Yeah, no. You and Joe.
The
should
Libertarian?
Yeah, Libertarian Joe.
He's not back.
You should just go in the studio and check it out.
You're messing with me.
Okay.
Okay. Nice joke, Kayla. Got me to go to the studio. No! No! Oh my gosh! No! No!
No!
Every time it gets me.
Welcome back. Welcome back to WJ Live. I'm Josh Manning, Deputy Managing Editor for Assignment at the Western Journal. I'm joined by Brian Chai on my left, and on my right, a libertarian whom we all know and tolerate, Joe Setyen. They are both also managing editors at the Western Journal. Thanks for joining us on WJ Live today. We've got a full show, packed tight with interesting content. There's a lot going on out there right now. There is more stuff. We were just talking about this before we went on in the air. There's more crazy stuff happening post-election than you can shake a stick at.
And as you know, things are made of stuff.
Things are made of stuff. That is true, I think.
Allegedly.
So first off, I want to talk with you guys about some voter fraud.
Oh boy.
Story fresh off the presses at the Western Journal. I'm going to read just a couple lines of it to you. Explosive voter fraud charge. 8,000 fraudulent voter registration applications in LA County. They came from just two men. Two men are accused of submitting more than 8,000 fraudulent voter registration applications in Hawthorne, California, according to a criminal complaint filed against them. In a 41-count criminal complaint, Carlos Antonio de Bourbon Montenegro, and Marcos Raul Arvelo, something like that, were charged with voter fraud after allegedly cooking up a scheme to try to register 8,000 fictitious, non-existent, or deceased voters to be sent mail-in ballots in L.A. The LA County, the Los Angeles Times reported. So this is interesting. This was an interesting operation. So you got two guys who went out using homeless people somehow. It's not clear quite how the homeless people fit into all of this.
Some homeless people and some non-existent voters. The criminal complaint was a little bit different than the DA's press release, but there was some sort of homeless people were involved and some other
basically what they were trying to do is they were trying to get 8,000 ballots that they could fill out
so that he could
put Montenegro in office as mayor. And if you don't know Hawthorne, California, it's kind of in the LA metro area. It looks like it has a population of about 80 or 90,000. So they were trying to basically get 10% of the vote through fake ballots. And there's a lot of talk about fake votes, fake election stuff going on. What's real? What's voter fraud? What's not voter fraud? Should we go to court? Should we not go to court? All of these things. This was a local issue, and in this case, some of the safeguards actually worked. The county registrar, they realized what was happening.
Yeah. And
they called them out on it, and the guys have ended up in jail, and they're facing jail time. But Joe, you and I were talking about this before the show started, and we were saying, yeah, they caught him in this case. There's no telling how much of this stuff happens that isn't caught. And one way that we could address that is through voter ID. And that's something that we talk about a reasonable amount in conservative circles.
Yep.
Had this gone through, had the registrar not caught them, voter ID could have stopped some amount of this. Why is it that the left is so anti-voter ID?
I mean, real quick, you said this is something we talk about in conservative circles. I honestly think this is something that's talked about in most moderate circles too. I do think it's
that's fair.
Very strictly the left that just hates the idea of voter ID. And Joe and it's again, we were talking about this earlier. Joe and I were talking about the most common complaint you hear is that voter ID laws are racist. They disenfranchise the people of minorities, people who've have criminal records. Like it would negatively impact them.
Not criminal records so much because I think it's just a ID thing. So I think that's a separate thing if you have a criminal record, whether or not you're allowed to vote.
All right. Well,
they're both
right.
types of voter suppression is what
alleged vote, accused of voter suppression. And I think the left just knows that it's really hard for them to win elections without not necessarily nefarious means, but sort of, being a little rough around the edges for them.
They presumably then they feel that they would have a great advantage with people who presumably would have a hard time getting an ID.
So let me play devil's advocate a little bit because I don't disagree with you completely,
not you.
right? I think there's a case to be made for, if you want to vote, you should have to provide your ID. I think that's probably fine.
Yep.
Here's the thing. Civil liberty groups will say that the reason that voter ID is not good is because the people who do not have IDs tend to be lower income. They tend to be, in many cases, minority because, unfortunately, minority people, on average, make less money than non-minority people, which I think is terrible. But that's the argument, and they try to use that to say, well, it's racist, which is not necessarily the case because I think that you can say, look, it's not good that a lot of people can't afford to pay $100 or $200 to get an ID, right? There's a lot of hoops you have to go through.
You have to pay money to get an ID? You have to pay money to get a state ID?
Yes.
I did not know that.
Yeah,
I mean,
so
you have to pay money to get a passport,
basically,
right?
in order
to get a passport, but I didn't have to pay. I don't think I had to pay Arizona anything for my driver's license.
There may be fact check me on that,
there may be states where it's
there
like that,
is.
Sorry.
I'm pretty sure you have to pay in most states to get an ID, right? You have to pay. There's hoops you have to go through. You have to go to the DMV. You have to go, to do whatever. If you have, let's say you work an hourly job where you can't really afford to miss all that much time and you're raising kids at the same time, I think there's a case to be made for saying, look, it's hard for people to get ID. We should remove some of the bureaucratic hoops and we should stop letting the government charge us so much for something that we ought, for something that they're saying, look, you have to get an ID to vote, which is fine, but then they're also saying, and you have to pay us to get that ID. That's basically saying you have to pay to vote, which I don't like. That's like a poll tax. What if we just said, look, we want you to get an ID, but we're not going to make you pay for it, and we're going to make it a lot easier for you to get an ID? And I think that kind of makes everyone happy, right?
Do you think I think you and I talked about this a couple weeks ago. I'm curious what you guys think. Do you think everyone should vote?
Well, I think everyone should have the right to vote.
That's a different question. Then.
I did
Do you
not
think everyone
vote.
should vote?
I think that if you don't feel like the candidates accurately express their views, if you don't feel like they did enough to earn your vote, then you have no. You should not feel like you have to vote for them.
I'm asking the question wrong. Then, do you think society would be better if everyone voted? Because you get around election time and you see all of these pushes, get out and vote. Oh, do your civic responsibility. Everybody proudly, except for me, wears the stupid I voted sticker.
I think if less
Do you
people,
think society would be better off if more people voted?
Yeah, I don't think it would be better off. I think that ideally, educated people would vote. People who, not even just educated, people who know what the issues are. That being said, I would never
people
say...
who have common sense, who are reasonable.
Right, I would never say, okay, look, I'm going to be the arbiter of who has common sense and who is reasonable.
Right,
I think it's important that if you're a stupid idiot, that you're still able to vote.
But you shouldn't.
But it would be better if you did.
You shouldn't.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think I'm a stupid idiot, and I didn't vote. But if you don't feel like you understand the issues, if you don't feel like any of the candidates, go along with what you believe, then
I've just never understood this idea that somehow the country is better off when more people vote, when everyone votes. And I know we're getting a little bit far afield from what we were talking about earlier, but I've wanted to discuss this with you, and I think it's an interesting thing. There's just this assumption out there, especially in the media, that, we're all better off when we all vote. And it's just like, gosh, first off, I don't know that I want anybody in the extreme elite. I'm not positive that those people have better judgment than, what was it Bill Buckley said, the first 400 names in the New York phone book, something like that. But there's probably something to that. But it's just not at all clear to me that we're better off because more people
I think we're better off if more people are educated and thus vote.
Right. But it's that first part that's
Right.
so hard to get to, and we don't have any evidence that that's really happening. I mean, when you look at education statistics, and you go out and you interview people and ask them what's going on in the world, and they're just incredibly ill-informed. It worries me that those people are voting, and the people are telling those people to vote. Those people are presumably
But the
impressionable
right,
too. And when a
can
Kardashian
never-
says, "Oh, you need to go vote," I need to go vote.
Yeah, I do think there is some that's sort of more of a, at least to me, a fairly clear line between the left and the right, where the right wants the best and the brightest to vote. The left knows that their policies kind of appeal to that lowest common denominator, so they want as many of those votes as they can possibly garner to push their agendas. I mean, I would like to think most people are smart enough to think, there's no such thing as free college tuition. But hey, if you're not,
they don't believe that. Bring it on, free college.
Yep.
Bring it on.
So if you're not particularly well informed, then like the idea of everyone should vote, because I think it was the movie Men in Black where I'm going somewhere.
Oh, it's going to be very insightful. Okay.
I believe
Stand by.
Tommy Lee Jones was telling Will Smith, a person can be, smart, insightful, thoughtful.
Yeah.
People are idiots. Yeah. And I do think there's a lot of truth to that. On an individual level, you can have very bright, well-informed, smart people. By and large, groups, you kind of lose some of that.
Yeah. It's just been a very interesting thing. Normally, leading up to elections, I will post on social media trying to see if I can discourage people from voting, because I think fewer people voting is generally a better thing. But I think I'm probably one of the only people who sort of thinks along those lines. But I was just curious what you guys
there's
thought.
some people who think that, but I'd say you're probably the only person just saying don't vote.
Come on, don't vote.
It does bring
Don't
up
do
an
it.
interesting question, because there's like people like Hamilton, the founding fathers, who didn't really want the regular people to have a say, and I don't think Hamilton was right in that, because he wasn't elitist. He thought, look, people like me have an education, we know what we're doing, we know what the issues are, we should be the people making the calls rather than kind of the rabble on the ground. I think he's wrong, but there's probably a balance between the majority rule is not a particularly good thing in many cases,
right?
But there's a balance between that and then between saying, well, only the small elites at the top are going to make all the calls.
So you were saying, and we got to move on. You were saying a second ago, though, that you didn't want to be the arbiter, the one to choose who gets to vote and who doesn't.
The issue is who's going to be the arbiter.
But I've got an idea for how to
Then you're the
arbitrate
arbiter.
those things, how to arbit those things. And I think I'm stealing from Buckley, though. What about the idea that if you receive any kind of income, any kind of money, any kind of compensation from the federal government, that you're not allowed to vote?
I think that's terrible.
See, I think it's an interesting idea, because if you're getting money from the federal government, then you have an incentive to vote for people who will continue to give you money.
Right, but that's
You're not
such
unbiased
that's
at
just
all.
Such a huge part of the population that you're going to disenfranchise. Then
It's just a thought. It's just a thought. I think it's an interesting thought. If you are getting money from the
'Cause then
federal
basically what
government,
you're saying
then
is
you are
only-
biased toward the people
only
who
the-
are giving you the money.
only the people who are well off then can vote. Because a lot of people
No,
get money
not
from the federal
necessarily.
government
Why in
because
the
they have.
world would that be the
'Cause-
case? There are plenty of presumably there are plenty of people who are checkers at the supermarket who don't get a check from the government.
Right, but you're disenfranchising so many people who don't have a choice. But look, if I'm poor and I don't necessarily believe that the federal government should be giving out money, I'm still going to take the money because the federal government's giving me.
But then you're going to just vote for people who will continue
Not
giving you
necessarily.
money. You're going to vote against your interest
Yes.
and
Yeah.
vote for people who will not give you money if
Sure.
you're poor and depending on that money.
Yeah, It's the same thing with the tax laws.
I don't think that's
that
likely.
The tax laws are stupid, but that you take advantage of the tax laws to your own benefit, but you could advocate for different tax laws.
On that note, that the tax code and tax laws are stupid, which I think we can all agree on. On that note, we have to move on to the next topic. Brian, what have you got?
I have a wonderful little report here,
discussion.
and this, believe it or not, is going to hit a little close to home for me. Not because it's in Washington, but because a Washington school district in Thurston County, in an equity report, basically deemed that Asian people are no longer people of color. Which,
You're Asian?
I know.
Wow.
Don't be too surprised by that. But
Breaking news.
I've actually, anyone in this office knows that for a while I've been banging this drum that it just feels like Asian people have had their person of color card revoked. And, this equity report, to be fair, it was from 2019 and it was promptly removed after some outrage, understandable outrage.
Asians?
Yeah. But yeah, it was basically monitoring, things like opportunity, and it even kind of categorized students of poverty and non-poverty students. But this just kind of it brought to light the nature of identity politics that the left loves to dabble in. It is just this just shows it's arbitrary. It's nonsense.
So they were reclassified as white.
Yeah, they lumped together. So in the opportunity gap of this equity report, students, it separated white/Asian students and then students of color.
Wow.
So I guess my first question, just simply put, isn't this kind of racist? This feels, not to play the race game here, but if the left's always going to accuse conservatives of being racist, this feels a little racist.
Well, I'll tell you, if I guess maybe it's a dangerous game today to play if I were a person of color, but if I were a person of color who was not Asian, I think I would be somewhat insulted at this, because then isn't the implication that Asians are too successful to be classified as people of color? So therefore, the people you classify as people of color are the unsuccessful people. Mm-hmm. And that does seem I'm not sure if it's racist so much as just backward and absurdist.
Right. I agree with Josh. I don't think it's racist. I think that it kind of shows the issue is that when you're obsessed with race, you're going to make stupid decisions like that, where you kind of become the arbiter of who's, these people are going to be students of color. We're going to show special treatment of students of color. I think that in Reason, they wrote a good story about this, and I think the point that they made is very good. It's that what the report reveals is that, and I'm quoting, the absurdities that result from over-reliance on semi-arbitrary race-based categories. So why are you dividing the stuff by race anyway? That's the first question.
Yeah.
Because then that just opens the door for your own stupid categories and whatnot. What's the point of this? Why? Why are you doing it?
Well, what's incredibly sad, too, is that it doesn't have to actually be like this when you're talking about these things in terms of achievement. Walter Williams, we ran an op-ed from Walter Williams yesterday, I think it came out yesterday, where he was talking about what happens in charter schools in New York, and what happens to different races when they show up in charter schools versus regular schools. And there are a couple really cool examples in New York because space is at a premium there, right? Sure. So there are a couple of public schools that also host charter schools in the same building. So these are clearly comparable cohorts, right? There are some kids who are in the charter school. There are some kids who are in the public school. And it is stunning the difference that it makes when the kids are in the charter schools, where they're allowed to boot students who don't behave well, where there's more accountability and those things. So it's not that... it's so depressing to think that, that you perform too well to be classified as a person of color. Mm-hmm. Well, there are black kids who perform incredibly well. They perform better than white kids. Mm-hmm. But they've got to be in an environment where there's accountability, and they also have to have parents who care enough to make sure they end up on the right path, which in some cases is the charter school. And so it's so fatalistic to me to say, Asians are just doing too well. We're not going to classify them as people of color because, people of color, they're going to underperform. Yeah. And that's what George W. Bush called, the subtle racism of low expectations.
Are you favorably citing George W. Bush?
Yeah, I'll favorably cite George W. Bush on plenty of things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, to me, it's just
Not my favorite president, but I liked him. Yeah.
to me, it does sort of show this, what's the word I'm looking for here? I like the word that you use, fatalistic, almost like this, like you're trying to bake this victimhood into, just like, oh, as
poor
weird
kid, you're
as
a
weird as
student
this
of
is
color.
for me to say, mockingly, oh, you're not white or Asian,
Yeah.
you're screwed. Like,
Yeah,
that's what these types of reports do.
Right, and it advances the narrative that is so important to the left because the left's whole thing is divisional politics. So it's building voting blocks, and so it used to be class based. Now it's race based, and to some extent gender identity based. But it's so perverse because it really there is so much fatalism in that where the little kid who grows up thinking this thinks, well, geez, I'm black, I guess it's game over. And if you've got that kind of fatalism is in your heart, it makes you do really, really stupid things too. People who are nihilistic go out and they make really bad decisions that hurt not only them but other people, and whether that's drugs or a sexually libertine lifestyle or crime or whatever, they make really bad decisions because they think there's no hope.
Yep,
It's
there's a hopelessness. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because I just remember, me personally growing up, it was never my my parents were never like, oh, like, you're not white, like, who cares about that? It's bust your hump, like, do what you gotta do, bust your hump, and
you made it.
Yeah, I guess so. I'm on WJ
Here
Live.
he is, Brian Chai.
But yeah, it's just such a weird, like, so I guess my follow-up question, it's a little broader. How concerned are you guys that this is not reversible? Because it feels like we're much closer to, like, I don't know, the purple race also losing their person of color card versus us, getting away from this line of thinking. It feels like we're headed towards something much worse, and I have no idea what it is, which makes it even scarier. How worried are you guys that this is sort of almost just the beginning of this, because this type of fatalistic thinking?
That we're divided and can never come back together?
Yeah.
You have any thoughts?
I mean, I think I think that political correctness and sort of this sense of identity politics, and I think intersectionalism, where it's your different kind of sections of victimhood, whether you're black or Asian or a woman, or whether you're gay or whether you're trans. I do think that has so... I don't think most people like it. I mean, you look at California, right? And they had a proposition that went on the ballot recently to basically say, yeah, you can discriminate against people if they're... I don't quite remember the specifics, but they said, yeah, you can discriminate
based on these circumstances.
White people, basically, or whatever. And most people said, no, this is a terrible idea, and they voted it down. So I think the public has common sense. I think the public is on the side of common sense. I think the issue is that leftists are so ingrained into the education system, into the government, into colleges especially, where they are the ones who are making, these rules, and it makes these institutions kind of meaningless.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, that's an interesting take. I agree. And one of the things the left has going for it, and will always have going for it, that conservatives don't, is for the left, the work of government and the work of improving humanity and those things, those can become super core to their identity. For a lot of people who are conservatives, the cores to their identity are hard work or their family or their relationship with God. And so those things kind of fill them up on the inside. And so they don't feel compelled to go out and find problems. And they don't feel compelled to define themselves by, oh, I've made this difference in this disenfranchised person's life. Whereas if you're on the left, I bring up nihilism again. There's an emptiness that goes with godlessness. There's an emptiness that goes without having a family. and so you try to fill it with something, and you want your life to be worth something. So you become an activist. You begin acting on behalf of the planet, or you begin acting on behalf of people of color, or whatever. And at that point, it's in your interest to promote those divisions, because as long as the divisions exist, then you have a purpose for being.
And I think a lot of them are good. They have the right intentions, right? They want, from a general
they want to do
perspective,
something good. There are a whole lot of useful idiots.
Sure.
And not to be too hard on them, but that's basically what they are, because Marx, Lenin, they realized you can use these people to advance your ideology, because they don't necessarily have a moral core that other people do, or a core identity that other people do. We're running out of time, so okay.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you brought up how the left sometimes uses that big government to fill that void, because I believe Joe wants to talk about some big government overreach.
I'm going to talk about the federal government proposing even more surveillance of your banking habits. So this is a little bit specific.
Very
specific. Kind of nitty gritty. So I'm actually just going to read here from Reason, who does some great work on this sort of privacy.
Did you used to work for them or something?
I did used to work for them. They do some great work on privacy and surveillance. And here we go. So most recently, the Federal Reserve, and I'm quoting, the Federal Reserve and Treasury Department have proposed expanding what is called the travel rule to capture international fund transfers above $250. Currently, financial institutions are required to make certain reports on customers when they send international transactions in excess of $3,000. Here's how it works. Let's say someone wants to send $5,000 to someone in the U.S. or abroad. That person goes to their bank and tells them where they'd like to send the money. The bank, by law, must collect, store, and send certain identifying data to the receiving financial institution, including the name, address, and account information for the sender and receiver. This data must be passed along intermediary financial institutions and stored for at least 5 years. It isn't immediately shared with the federal government unless it is determined to be suspicious enough to trigger suspicious activity report requirements under a certain act that exists. In other words, banks must keep this data on hand in case the government ever needs it. Now, these people are not suspected of any crime, right? These people are just banking. They're not. The Fourth Amendment says, you're innocent until proven guilty. This seems to kind of fly in the face of, well, you're actually innocent until proven guilty. I mean, it seems like the government just wants to have data so that they can use it if they decide, maybe you do something suspicious down the road. But all these people are accused of is sending money, wiring money, internationally. So I guess my first question, and we're running out of time, so we can go through these pretty quick, but do you think that this so-called travel rule is constitutional? Does it go against the Fourth Amendment at all? And is this something you want the federal government to be doing?
To the second question, definitely no. There's a part of me that would almost understand the $3,000 threshold, because look, I'm your average Joe Schmo American. I ain't never sending $3,000 abroad to anyone ever. 250? That I might send. That's a very alarming threshold for the government to want my personal data over that. As far as the constitutionality of it, I'm not a expert on it. It feels like an invasion of privacy, which I think to a lot of Americans, especially post 9/11, a lot of the stuff that happened after 9/11, you want to avoid anything that that'll trigger some of that sort of those bad memories of post 9/11 where America didn't feel like America anymore.
But do you sacrifice sort of liberty for security? Are you willing to do that?
That's the
Should
eternal,
Americans be willing to do that?
That's the eternal conundrum, right? Personally, to a certain extent, I might be willing to, but I think there's a very clear line that we don't want to cross, and I think once you're within like 500 feet of that line, you'll know what it is.
Okay. And you think $250 is past that line?
I think it's too close for comfort, yeah.
Okay.
I remember when I was a teenager,
Long ago.
Yeah. As my hairline continues to attest. I was working for my dad. My dad was a builder, and so I was just sort of a gopher for him. I would go deliver stuff and run to the bank and those kinds of things. And one day he needed to move, I think it was $10,000 from an account at one bank to an account at another bank. And so he sent me to do it. And I, being a stupid kid, when the when I went to the bank, the first bank, to withdraw the money, they asked me, do you want a cashier's check or do you want cash? And I was like 16. I thought, well, $10,000 in cash is kind of cool. So
It is kind of cool.
yeah. So they hand me $10,000 in cash, and I go get in the truck, and I go to the next bank, and I go to deposit it, and there's a bunch of paperwork to fill out and all of this stuff that I wasn't expecting because post 9/11. Actually, no, that was probably pre 9/11. So at that point, it turns out there was like a $9,999 limit. If you were depositing more than that, there was paperwork.
It would probably be a lot
to
worse
fill
now
out.
after.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, and that's sort of my point. Is that, like, it's $10,000 at that point, and now all of a sudden, in some circumstances, we're down to $250
Internationally, yeah.
internationally. That's remarkable to me. And I mean, you can, especially with the global economy, there's lots of stuff overseas that you can spend $250 on. And what business is it of the governments? I mean, some of this goes back to some of the Snowden stuff too. They set this up so cleverly where if you send a text to your wife, but it gets routed through a server in the UK, then all of a sudden the NSA has access to it. Like, this is, I can't imagine the founders, when they were putting the Republic together, that this was a scenario they envisioned. The idea of like King George getting to see their texts, I think, would sort of tick them off. And this doesn't seem especially American.
I think, unfortunately, the thing is we've reached a point, this is not the sexiest issue, right? But we've reached a point where most people probably aren't going to know about this, right? And maybe most people don't even send money internationally, so it doesn't affect them. But it's just these little infringements on your freedom that slowly by slowly, and when people don't pay attention, you look and you don't even know where's your freedom anymore,
Yeah, it erodes super quickly, and it's just truly what business is it of the governments? And, we did a whole lot of stuff in the post 9/11 world that made life so much more miserable. And sometimes it's in really small ways, sometimes it's in absolutely enormous ways. Well, if you've ever financed a house or refinanced a house, the amount of paperwork you now have to go through because of that. If you get a loan, if you open a bank account, I mean, look at what airports have become. Just the utter nightmare.
The TSA has never saved a single person's life. And yet,
all right, relax.
I feel very strongly about the TSA.
When they do the math, I remember when I was in grad school, we actually did the math on that. What are the chances, given a certain failure rate, what are the chances that airport security is actually going to catch the thing that they're supposed to catch? It's really small. But people wanted some sort of security.
It makes
after
them feel
9/11.
warm and fuzzy
It
inside.
makes them feel safer.
Yeah.
And it's a confluence of two really dangerous things. One, people wanting to feel safe, which you're never going to be safe. And two, politicians who are more than happy to provide that sense of safety in exchange for power. And that's very dangerous.
Let me ask one more quick question, right? Because you said politicians who are willing to do this. This isn't politicians. This is the federal bureaucracy. This proposed rule change that we were talking about, isn't this something that Congress should be doing and making legislation about if they want to, instead of, it's a proposed rule change from these federal agencies right now. Why is that up to them to make that rule?
It's a good question. Why is it up to them?
Yeah.
Because we let it be up to them.
Yeah.
We're not putting the... And part of this is,
These are
there's a
unelected
broader
people.
philosophical issue here. Part of this is that life in America is so good. There's a reason we have generally low voter turnout, this election accepted. Life is so good here that we don't think about, we have the luxury of not thinking about things like that.
Yeah.
But that's a dangerous thing. We built the founders built the republic well enough and started with a virtuous enough people that the end product has been amazing right now. But we are slowly doing very foolish things that eventually are going to have an enormous cumulative
And hopefully
effect.
the people care enough to, push back on these sorts of
Yeah,
things.
but we're not there yet. And then the question is, you said, well, you wake up one day and then where's your free? And that's the question. Are we going to wake up before that happens?
I will say, I know we got to wrap this up soon. Maybe one of the few upsides to this whole coronavirus thing is that I think it really has woken up a lot of people to, realizing how easy it is for the rights to get infringed on. On westernjournal.com, you can read a story that we wrote about, I believe it was Pennsylvania just passed, or their guidelines now ask that people wear masks in their homes.
Yeah.
Like, come on, guys. Like, that's
Even if
Yeah,
you
and
support
how do you
masks,
validate-
and I
how-
think
how do you
masks,
check that?
I think people should wear masks. I don't think they should be, illegal. I don't think it should be a government thing. I think people should wear masks. But like, who is that benefiting?
Yeah,
Who,
exactly.
Yeah. Who's that helping? No one thinks that's helping anything. It's just the government trying to get involved and
Well, there are
Yep.
politicians who think it's improving their chances of reelection.
sure.
Which is crazy.
That's one thing. That's the
Yeah.
biggest thing. Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And those are the people you
And
give
it's
power to. It's
you
very
want
dangerous.
to do something. They're saying let's do something.
And it's to do
even-
something.
Yeah.
Do something. After it got to the point there, after every alleged mass shooting, but it could just be a significant shooting, that celebrities and others would go online and they just say, do something, do anything.
Thoughts and prayers aren't enough.
Yeah, just do something. And I think at one time there was even a hashtag. That was
I think
like,
that's
do,
just one of
do
the most
something.
dangerous things when you're
It's
talking
so
about the government
dangerous.
because
Yeah.
you're basically
So
giving the
dangerous.
government free reign
Because most
to do whatever they
things-
want.
Yeah, and most things you can do make things worse.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
We don't ever stop to think about that. But think of the number of things you can do inside your body, bounded by your body, you can do that won't harm you compared to the number of things you can do that will harm you.
Yeah.
Overwhelmingly, if you randomly choose to do something, it will hurt you.
You know what
And,
will?
and we've lost sight of that.
You know what will help you?
What?
Subscribing
Subscribing to the Western Journal. That's right. Remember, WJ Live is brought to you by the Western Journal. We say we're powered by the Western Journal. The three of us work at the Western Journal. We produce journalism, we produce news content, we produce opinion content that you will not see other places. We openly say that we are not looking to be neutral. We believe that the battlefield of ideas and the battlefield where we meet the media, that's an important thing, and that taking a position in the culture war, taking a position on freedom is important. So we unashamedly say, yeah, we're biased toward freedom. We are biased toward a Christian worldview. We are biased toward smaller government. And we produce content along those lines. We're the only group in the business that really, really does that, especially with the Christian worldview. So if you want to help us, if you want to support us, please absolutely do subscribe. To our audio listeners, you can go to youtube.com/WJ Live. You can click the subscribe button. And then if you hit the bell, you'll be notified every time we go live.
Ding!
You can also go to westernjournal.com/join, and you can become a supporter of the Western Journal there. We are so grateful for all the help you give us. And by the way, once you do that, you do get far fewer ads. It's a much more streamlined experience. And every time somebody does that, they are helping basically bulletproof us against big tech. Just this last week, Facebook actually suppressed one of the Western Journal's pages for a while. They were upset over a couple of voter fraud stories that we had done, and they suppressed us, and we saw our traffic take a significant hit. The more folks who subscribe, the less reliant we are on big tech, and we are grateful for all the help you give us. You can join us here each day, Monday through Friday. That's at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 Pacific, for WJ Live, and it'll probably be at least one of us here. And we've got a few different folks who host from time to time, but we are thankful for you watching. We're thankful for you spending time with us. Covet your prayers. We appreciate your subscriptions, and we're looking forward to seeing you tomorrow at the same time, 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific. Thanks. Have a great day.
Hi, my name is Logan Harris, and I am co-director of WJ Live, powered by the Western Journal. We have enjoyed recording WJ Live these past few weeks, and we have some exciting news.
We are now on Apple Podcasts, but we need to ask you a favor.
In order to equip even more readers with the truth and continue our fight against big tech, we're going to need more subscribers and reviews.
Go find WJ Live on Apple Podcasts, hit the subscribe button, and leave us a 5-star review.
Thank you for helping us out. And don't forget, you can catch a new episode of WJ Live every Tuesday and Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern and 2 p.m. Pacific on YouTube and now Apple Podcasts.